So, today I want to talk about religious freedom and life saving medication. I believe it is beyond an understatement to say that Christian nationalists have been emboldened as of late to use the courts as a weapon to justify their bigotry. The Supreme Court's majority conservative members and their recent opinions have signaled to these Christian nationalists that the time is ripe to attack areas previously covered by privacy and health. This is being done by claiming it is one's religious freedom to attack the safety and protections afforded to other people. Now, a federal judge in Texas has applied this twisted logic to life saving HIV medication. Now, we have here that a conservative federal judge in Texas ruled Wednesday that requiring employers to cover PrEP HIV prevention drugs in their health insurance plans, as the Affordable Care Act does, violates their right to religious freedom. U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor, a George W. Bush appointee, decided in favor of Braidwood Management, a Christian owned Texas based company. He ruled that it shouldn't have to cover the cost of PrEP based medications that hundreds of thousands of Americans take daily to prevent HIV transmission, because Braidwood's owners have religious objections to gay sex. O'Connor cited the 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the same law that the Supreme Court ruled in 2014 protects employers' right to refuse to cover birth control. Now, there's actually a lot to unpack from this information. To start with, this judge has attacked the Affordable Care Act on multiple occasions throughout his history as a judge. In 2018, for example, he deemed it unconstitutional and seems quite opposed to the access that the Affordable Care Act provides. For whatever reason, this judge has been predisposed to support the biases of the business owner in this case, and yet he's in a position of power to determine if people can have access at their place of employment to life-saving medications, effectively legislating from the bench. That seems to be quite out of his jurisdiction and certainly an abuse of power. Now, to look further into this, I do want to emphasize that the attorney in the case, Jonathan Mitchell, had argued as his main point that mandatory PrEP coverage forces Christians to subsidize homosexual behavior. And when it comes to the actual ruling, the defendants are said to have outlined a generalized policy to combat the spread of HIV, but they provide no evidence connecting that policy to employers, such as Braidwood, nor do they provide evidence distinguishing potential religious exemptions from existing secular exemptions, O'Connor said in his ruling. Thus, defendants have not carried their burden to show that PrEP mandate furthers a compelling governmental interest. So, to start with, here's the main thing. Most insurance in the United States is tied to employment. So yes, there is a connection between employment and this health insurance and medication. Second of all, it is a compelling government interest because the stopping of the spread of a very dangerous virus is technically within the government's interest. And making sure people are able to get access to preventative care and the knowledge that's associated with it is tied to all that. Meanwhile, eliminating the preventative healthcare provisions of the Affordable Care Act, as this judge seems to have implied within his ruling, could free private insurers from the obligation to provide so much basic coverage. Again, we're talking about vaccines, pregnancy care, cancer screening, and treatment. The point in all of this is that they can use religious exemptions, including bigotry against gay people, like they're doing right now, to try to prevent certain forms of medication from becoming accessible to people through insurance. And of course, insurance is often tied to employment. So further, in all of this weaponizing of religion to justify bigotry is quite an old story. Religious freedom has been used as the justification for segregation, for anti-miscegenation laws, for laws designed to attack women, and anti-LGBTQ laws of all kinds, including a lot of the laws that are in the current trans panic. And generally, a lot of state violence against oppressed groups has been effectively done by utilizing this major weapon of Christian nationalism in the United States. It's done on the grounds that a bunch of Christian nationalists are made uncomfortable by people they have biases against. These biases come first, and then a religious argument is developed in order to uphold the status quo and attack oppressed peoples. Essentially, these Christian nationalists feel oppressed because they have been asked to acknowledge that people unlike them exist, and they need to use state violence to help maintain their worldview and impose it on others. In the rare cases where the state goes against their biases, they see this as further oppression and usually double down on their positions. In fact, anytime you see a case of equality happen, they become the most oppressed people on the planet. However, within all of this, there is no acknowledgement that by enforcing their worldview, they're in fact oppressing others by using state violence. In fact, these religious objections don't even need to be grounded in reality to declare religious freedom. In fact, most of them aren't. But when we're looking at this particular example for PrEP is a medication that is an HIV preventative. It's taken to avoid contracting the virus. HIV, despite this religious objection, is not a gay disease. We have here statistics that show that in the United States, heterosexual people in 2019 made up 23% of all HIV diagnoses. And as a matter of fact, this is pretty consistent over a span of several years. It's approximately 25% at all times. And not that it's completely relevant to US law, but in the UK, this number is at 49%. It's almost half of all new cases, meaning that it is not a gay disease as it's being pointed out to be. The point is in all of this, and why I bring this up, is that this affects a wider range of people than the religious business is willing to admit, but apparently that's irrelevant considering this person needs religious freedom. Since the business owner believes that it's a gay disease, it's enough to grant religious exemption in the courts in the United States in order to discriminate against gay people. That's perfectly legal. Now, the unfortunate effect is that it's going to affect everyone because it naturally affects more of the population because the biases were incorrect to begin with. Now, nobody should be denied access to life-saving medicine, especially medicine that costs $20,000 annually as PrEP does. However, most insurance access in the United States, as I mentioned before, is tied to employment. And these Christian nationalists are using their tried and true tactics to deny people access to these medicines by using their financial positions in businesses, which gives them far more power and sway than if they were just regular people working jobs. Now, the fact that this is a business entity claiming this religious exemption should be absurd to most of you listening. But unfortunately, in the United States, that's the law. Corporations can have religious affiliations here. In the combination of the 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the 2014 Hobby Lobby Supreme Court case, where the Supreme Court granted that Hobby Lobby did not need to provide contraceptives on religious grounds, the US court system has made it so that corporations can be granted religious exemptions that can then be applied to things like anti-discrimination laws and, of course, now medications. I bring this up, of course, because if companies can be religious and can therefore create these types of exemptions in their businesses, then of course Christian nationalists can use their positions as bosses to apply authoritarian tactics as to which medications are acceptable and therefore determine who has access to medications that can determine whether or not somebody lives or dies. Which is perhaps the bigger issue here and brings up a larger systemic issue about employment and medication. The larger issue here is actually that we need to rely on an employer to provide our health insurance in the first place. This is not to excuse this business owner's actions or to deny that this is a version of weaponized Christian nationalism, as well as state violence by the court, but theoretically, as long as bosses remain in control of access to health care, then the owner class can force you into submission to their beliefs in exchange for life-saving care. In fact, if we really do look at it, many jobs don't actually provide health care at all. And so this care could be taken away in a moment's notice. And when it comes to cases like these, it should be recognized that the boss can now decide it's against their religion and take away your medicine. The wider solution here is to divorce healthcare from employment and grant it to everyone and acknowledge it as a human right. Nobody should be able to be coerced by an employer or especially a court, should not be able to deny access to medication that can allow you to save your life. As long as financial interests are at play, people will continue to be denied access to medical care. The solution's obvious. We just need to fight for it twice as hard as the Christian nationalists and their financial interests. And that is going to mean organizing and trying to make universal healthcare an actual thing. So with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as joining my Discord where we have political conversations like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below. And with that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. Thank you so much for watching.